Okay, welcome to the Ska History Hour with your hosts, Jose Rojas
Hello?
and myself, Daryl Rubio, wherein the purpose of this channel is to spread awareness of ska music to the world. Our guest today is the man behind Jump Up Records and the ska radio show Everything Offbeat on WNUR 89.3 FM, Chuck Wren.
All right.
Hello.
Yeah, Chuck, we appreciate you taking the
I like
time to
your
speak with us.
backdrop.
Yeah,
Thank you.
he's got a green screen, so he
Kind of,
impresses
yeah, kind of
he
creeping
impresses
me
others.
out, but it's cool.
So, Chuck, we appreciate the time you're taking with us to speak with us about stories of your involvement in the ska scene and spreading the awareness to the ska community. We see that you started Jump Up in 1993. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did.
1993. All right. Uh, how did that all come to fruition? How did you kind of start that? Hopefully, I didn't take one of Jose's questions. I think I might have.
I think the majority of people who, and yourself included, started labels, back then in the 90s, is we didn't really set out per se. We didn't like wake up one day and say, I'm going to start a label, I'm going to do this. You kind of did it because no one was doing what you felt needed to be done, right?
Exactly.
For me, it was all these Midwest bands that I thought were amazing and were getting overshadowed by the coasts. So I basically one day said, well, I'm just going to do it because everyone needs to know about all these great bands. But you didn't really say this was going to be a career move. This wasn't going to be, I didn't have a 2 year plan. I didn't have a 5 year plan. It was just you made one, see how it went, see what the reaction was, and if it was cool, you went on to number two. And I feel like everyone in our era, that was just it. We were doing something because nobody else was doing what we thought needed to be done. How about that?
That's the nail on the head right there. And you on your 32-year plan now, right?
Yeah. Yeah, little did I know it was going to help, pay for my daughter's college or be a, some sort of career move.
Yeah,
But, I think the reason why I'm still doing it is because it still excites me in the same way where I
right.
can, help a band get to, woo, look at that stuff. Yeah, there's the first one.
This is the first one. That's you start off
There's the first one, yeah.
black and white, and you start off with all the bands in your area, kind of.
Yeah.
Pretty
And
much.
a lot of them are still contenders today.
That's right. And you even had a UPC code
I
more
did.
than most labels.
I can't remember if the UPC code was on the first. Oh
The
man, now
first
I gotta
pressing.
go look. Yeah, it might not have been on the first pressing, and then I was badgered into it in later pressings. See,
Oh
that's for
man.
the that's for the Discog nerds. That's
Yeah, and
that's.
I thought I had the original. I guess
Oh,
I'm
you might.
maybe
I don't
old.
know. Let me see the back again. Go grab it again. There was a version with a different logo that I stole from Byron Lee temporarily. So let's see which one you got.
How do I look? Just what this one?
Slide it a little bit to the side. Oh no, that's not the first.
Oh, God, now. Great, now you got me. I'm going to search Discogs now for that.
Yeah, there's one that has the little like I stole it from the Byron Lee Jump Up
Oh yeah,
album, and there was just the woman that's jumping up, and I just blacked it out and stole that for the initial batch, and then I realized, oh, this may be something long term, so I better have something drawn by somebody.
exactly. Yeah, I'm back in the
Maybe.
cut and paste days.
Oh yeah, I mean, I had clip art like up the wazoo, and I would joke in my newsletter that if I ever had a lack of content that I would type out, that I would just put clip art in,
Yeah,
and people just loved the clip art, and you would then see the creations of the clip art. It wasn't drawn by me, but a friend of mine kind of redrew the beat girl or redrew the rude boy, the Walt guy, and then I would see his incarnations of the clip art on flyers all across the USA because people got my newsletter and they're like, "I'm going to take that one. That was
yeah.
different." It was just sort of cool to see it live this viral life before there was a viral life, I guess.
Right. Exactly. Now, do you even know how many releases that you have? All formats.
No. Well,
Yes.
I guess I could just ask Discogs and run some report.
Yeah.
Um, I
Yeah, 'cause
don't, yeah, I don't really know. I think it's pretty accurate up there. But
it's
then
got to be
sometimes,
over 300, right? Releases?
yeah, it's gotta be. I mean, if some formats have, LP, CD, and tape, I mean, right there, I had a couple with 8 tracks too, so those would be
Yeah.
four. But,
Yeah. Like that
yeah,
Skunks
no,
one.
it's gotta be. I mean, the catalog number we're using now are over 200 just on the LPs.
Mhm.
So
Damn.
if half of those were, multiple formats, yeah, 350, 400 maybe. I don't know. The sad thing is I'm not great at keeping stuff for myself from time to time. So there are actual jump up releases that I do not own myself because it was always one of those things where you fill the mail order like, oh, I'll grab it the next time, and then you just never did. And I'm on the lookout every so often to buy my releases back.
Do you remember which ones
usually
those
from
are?
usually from Japanese. I remember the Peacocks LP. My edition, I don't have one.
Wait, the CD or the
No,
the
the,
LP?
the LP version, the In
Oh,
Without
okay.
Knocking.
Huh.
Because a lot of those got exported to Japan. So
Yeah.
they should look again, see if I can buy it back. But a lot of the tapes, I'm really bad at saving myself. But you can kind of crank out more of those.
Yeah, of course.
So it is what it is. But a
Yeah.
lot.
A lot. That is a lot.
Mhm.
Now, how do you find the bands that you consider signing, and what do you look for when signing band?
That's always an interesting question. I don't overly take demos. Let's just put it this way. I always feel like with the bands I put out that I'm somehow in a in the right place at the right time to see the next band that I want to work with. Um, or a band that I've worked with will tell me about someone to keep an eye on. And a lot of times some of the bands that I'll work with, I've been watching for 3 to 5 years, and they've, hit me up in the past to release their music in some way, shape, or form, and I've said no. And I sometimes they're kind of surprised when a few years later, now I see what I like. I see something that wasn't there initially.
Mm.
I'm not hazing them. I mean, it's just when it clicks, it clicks. And when it is at that level that I want to help them get to the next level, I'm on top of it. Like I'm chasing
Mm.
them down. You know, I'm asking what part of the process they need help with. Maybe I can bring in designers or bring in, mastering sound guys to kind of clean things up more. I mean, all of a sudden I can maybe go from 0 to 60 in a few seconds, and
Nice.
um, you know, there are definitely times where I've relied on, like I said, the advice of others. So, what's a recent example? So, a recent example, I was talking to Matt Wixon a little bit, who you
Mhm.
guys are familiar with, and he
Yes.
was telling me, man, when you're out in Boston for those Bim Scala Bim shows, make sure you check out Brunt of It. I said, "Oh yeah, I'm familiar with
Yeah.
them. I'm familiar. I'm familiar with the record." He's like, "No, no, no. This new thing is on fire. This thing is, it's punky ska that makes sense for you.
Mhm.
It's not like cookie cutter. It's intense. It kind of has these '90s vibes to it." He's like, "This is the right kind of ska punk for your label. I know you don't do a ton of it, but this makes sense." I'm like, all right, sounds good. And then all of a sudden I was kind of looped in with some of the early, unmastered tracks. And I said, yeah, this stuff is really good. But,
Mhm.
in most cases, the crowning jewel is me seeing the band and like, okay, can they pull it off, live? And when I was out there, I saw everything I wanted to see, and it was one of those things where, right after the set, I'm talking to the right people,
You're all
That's
in.
everything I wanted to see. This is we need to do this. We need to like put this on the schedule. We need to move forward. Where are you at with this? What do you need help with? And it's just, it's like that. I can turn it on that quickly. And I think it's because I know what I like. I know kind of what I'm looking for.
Hmm.
And in that case, it was the advice of people from, our era that, I take very, you know, I take that advice very strongly. If someone says, keep an eye out on this band, I'm going to. And when other
Hmm.
bands say, keep an eye out on this band, you know, they're they know that we're all on the right track. We're all trying to kind of create a network that will help each other in the end. And I think what's been great is that it kind of helps get to the next level. So, you see a lot of these bands as I put out their, records will play like Slackfest in Chicago,
Mhm.
and then the slackers tend to get to see these bands live and see what I see, right? You
Right.
know, and then quite often they take these bands out regionally for 4 dates here, 5 dates there, and it's
Nice.
just it's just this wonderful kind of organic network, right? It's not me, you know, hitting the phone and leaning on somebody
Mhm.
saying you really need to take these people out. It kind of just happens because it clicks for all of us at the same time.
Right.
Um, and I feel bad for, you know, bands that maybe are sending me their material, but I can't really get a full sense of where a band is at, visually and, and live. And even if I like the record, it doesn't mean that it's going to be enough to sell in this day and age. I mean, so much stuff
Hmm.
is out on vinyl now that it's not, you can't just, make 500 records and know 500 records are going to sell. It's
Right.
not that simple anymore. And there's a lot of people who are buying lots of different types of music.
Hmm.
I can't
Yeah.
assume that everyone is just, buying ska and reggae records. They're not, they're buying whatever, new indie rock records out, whatever punk records out. I mean, the market is very, very tough. You're combining,
Mhm.
you're competing for dollars. And sometimes you kind of see what's about to come out on a certain date and you either kick yours ahead or you kick yours past. You don't want to, come out at the same time. So there's a lot of nuance these days. And you kind of do it because you want that new band or the band's new record to have a chance.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's a lot of timing. Sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong. And what I tell bands all the time is, I play the long game, right? So don't message me 10 days after the records come out and ask me how many have sold. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter. It literally doesn't matter because I'm going to continuously push that record in every newsletter,
Hmm.
in all these bundle sales and post here, post there. I mean, I'm pushing this record for years, you know.
Right.
So
And so
Yeah.
don't worry.
you've
If
really,
you also drop a record and maybe only 50 or so sold that first weekend, you're like, that's fine.
right.
I'll keep going.
Mhm.
I have enough other bands that when they put out their records, someone comes to the site and said, "Oh, I've been meaning to pick up this, Attractors record or Backyard Superheroes record or whatever." I'm like, "Oh, this would be my opportunity." I mean, it's the long game, you know. But I think the key to that being successful is just constantly having something come out,
Hmm.
every
Mhm.
month, every 6 weeks, whether it's some imports I bring in. I mean, there just needs to be something that brings people to the table on any given day. And
Right.
what's bizarro these days is with so many releases out, it's really hard for me to figure out what is going to be that catalyst on any given day,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And then you see what people order, and you're like, that makes 0 sense. I
Yeah.
mean, I like them all, right? It's like I like them all, but out of the 20 things that were new in my newsletter, how did those three for you rise to the top over this record, or this no sports record that
Yeah.
I love because I'm from that era, and I'll write a description basically telling you about all my excitement about some of these bands.
Mhm.
You didn't order that. You're like, oh, okay. Maybe you'll get it the next time. Maybe it's maybe it's simply a money thing. You chose these three because those were what got you the free shipping and what, you know, interests you the most. And maybe you'll come back later. Maybe you won't. But yeah, I can't figure it out half the time. And
Mhm.
I literally had like a mail order. It was only like a month ago. It was like the biggest mail order we ever had. Someone had bought just under $900
Oh,
worth of
wow.
stuff.
Wow.
And it was so diverse, right? It wasn't just all skinhead reggae. It wasn't all just 60s silent ska. It was all across the board,
Huh.
and it was just super interesting.
Must have been a
And
DJ starting out.
they bought twos of most things, so there were two people going in on it.
Oh.
And it was just fascinating. And the great thing about a mail order like that is you quickly go and pay one of your repress bills from it.
Yeah,
There you
exactly.
go.
There's no like,
I wonder how
there's
you
no
ship.
like this going on. It's like, oh, you need to pay one of my bills.
Yeah. So you like with some of the bands that like say you're putting out like you mentioned Brunt of It. They had an album before. With some of
Hmm.
these bands, do you ever have the tendency that you believe in them so much that you want to re-release what they did by themselves?
Sometimes it's possible.
Mhm.
It's really hard to say. Um, Sometimes I like to move just forward. You know, I'm not really someone who just puts out catalog for the sake of catalog. Um, and there's a lot of projects that I have going forward that to make a decision to release something previously put out by the band, it has to be. I'm trying to think of if I have any real examples of that. Wow.
Because I know that you put out other stuff, like you did um, Chaos in Scaville with the Skunks, which is fucking. I love
Hmm.
that. I used to have
Yeah.
that tape back in the day. A lot of some of the Moon stuff that they don't do anymore that you're putting out on vinyl, shit that we've always wanted, which is awesome. All that like that No Sports Twang one, awesome.
Yeah.
You know. So
I think with some of that stuff, though, I mean, with all the old Moon stuff, it's all contacting band members and say,
mm,
do you want this to exist? Sometimes it's the, catalyst for the band to do a couple of reunion shows, in Chicago or wherever they're from. The Chaos in Scaville, it's funny you bring that up because when I reached out to, the members of the Skunks, most, two or three of them
Steve
at the
Orders.
time, yeah, were like, our Eastern Standard Time guys. The first thing they said was, "Wait, you want to do Chaos in Scaville?" Like, yeah,
Not mixed nuts
right.
or
Why
yeah,
don't you want to do mixed nuts? I'm like,
yeah.
well, Chaos in Scaville was the tape that introduced me to you guys. I
Mhm.
think it's a phenomenal tape. It's kind of lost in time in many ways, and that's just what I want to do.
It was pretty much the same with the Scofflaws too. That
Yeah,
you released that first tape that I used to have with that Daniel Ortega song, which was my
yeah,
favorite from
right.
them. That was just an amazing album back in the 90s. And then you
Yeah,
released that on vinyl, which was awesome. And
yeah.
when I was out there on the East Coast, I had the guys, I think it was only the three of the members were still in the band when I saw them in Long Island.
Hmm.
And I got them to sign.
Awesome.
It was awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, and a lot of those decisions, I'll back it up a little bit. I've chosen those releases because they are bands that are still semi-active. So,
Mhm.
when I reached out to, Sammy from the Scofflaws, and I said, Richard Brooks, whatever nickname, you know him by, I said, you guys are legends and you're still playing a
Mhm.
lot and you don't have any product at the moment. Like, this makes sense. You're going to have a whole new generation of fans because they can buy your records on vinyl, and young people who are coming to their shows they're not going to buy your CDs. That's
Right.
kind of still that's kryptonite to them. So it wouldn't have made sense for me to do it if the band couldn't immediately see the value in it, right? That they're putting product on their table and someone's immediately giving them $20, at shows, and they're just excited. And they're excited to sign them, like you
Yeah.
said, it's the big format, right? So people do come and get everyone in the band to sign it. And I'm not just going to go down willy-nilly and reach out to an old band member for the
Is
sake
it
of making a few bucks, right? If they can't, do something with it on their own and sell it or have a, reunion around it, well, then it doesn't really serve a purpose for me. I mean, I'm not just putting out records for the sake of putting out records. I'm not,
Mhm.
doing a million editions of the same record to just
Mhm.
keep, you know, cash cowing people and taking their money. It's got to make sense.
Yeah.
It's got to have some sort of long-term use, I guess, if that makes sense. And for the scofflaws, this was awesome because all of a sudden, you know, old fans were enjoying the records again,
Yep.
albums that they hadn't listened to for 35 plus years. And then new fans who had only heard of the legacy of the scofflaws were taking a chance buying the record, loving it, and then discovering the band all over again.
Yeah.
So, I think that was very successful. And with like the Scholars records, they did some reunion shows around it.
Hmm.
Um,
Supernova.
so
Yeah.
uh, it's
Oh, they're
it's it's
gonna play
interesting
Supernova.
now because we're at a point where so much vinyl comes out. It just doesn't seem like everyone has that same um, theory behind it, right? Now it's just crank it out, make some money. That's not what I'm doing here.
But you also
um,
released Ska and Hi-Fi with them too. So you
I
released
did,
two.
yeah.
Yeah.
And those records both did great.
Yeah.
I mean, the band's selling them all the time, and they're touring again. They're making it out to the Midwest,
Uh-huh.
but part of the reason why is people want to see them again. These records have sold great, and they continue to find new fans all the time.
Hmm.
So I got to get them repressed.
Yeah.
As as we spent all this time talking about them, they go to my site. They're like, "Oh, they're out of print." Worst commercial ever.
Now, how did you get into ska?
What's that?
Now, how did you get into ska? Your first experiences with ska?
So it was actually in the mid '80s. So the whole
Uh-huh.
two tone thing had already fallen apart. But my best friend's older sister, she was super cool, and she had Selector, poster in her room, and she had an Untouchables jean jacket. Yeah,
Oh wow.
Untouchables jean jacket made. She made it
Wow.
herself,
That's
like
awesome.
that kind of kick-ass cool. And I would hear this music emulating from, her room. And so by the time, I was basically in the music purchasing age, right? Beginning of high school, I was already, buying, all the two-tone records and um, buying some of those Mango Island comps to learn about the
Uh,
old stuff. And so we were pretty much all in by like freshman, you know, sophomore year of high school. Which is why when I, went to Northwestern started in 1988, one of the first things I wanted to do was start a radio show
mhm.
because I had listened to the college station in high school, and I said, well, I want to do my own radio show, but I want to do an all ska radio show. So I had to, you know, spend the time, apprenticing and you know, I guess kissing the right asses for someone to eventually, let me have a chance over the summer when most of the students are gone.
Yeah.
And the show had done so well in its initial launch over the summer and that was the whole goal, that uh, when everyone came back from the fall, they couldn't easily take me off because I had already built up such a following.
Yeah.
And back then it was a lot of hard work. It was putting flyers in, record stores and clothing stores. Um, doing DJ gigs and passing out flyers. I mean, you're literally flyering about your radio show.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really hard to tell someone young that, like, I need to give you a piece of paper for you to tune in at a certain time on your radio. I mean, it was a very different time, but it also seemed like it meant more because you had to really bust your ass to get
Hmm.
people
Hmm.
to pay attention. But also, when someone, felt like that they were reached in this way, the word of mouth was so strong, right? I mean, people would tell each other about radio shows and concerts and, you know, take that flyer and make a copy of the flyer for their friend. So it meant a lot to a lot of people. So you could actually, really promote with very little. As as I
Yeah.
see your flyers shared from time to time, I'm like, it's a Sniff Dog logo. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I've seen that one.
That was a different time. Now,
Mhm.
you attend lots of music festivals, and you also throw a lot of shows. How many festivals do you actually attend a year that you've got to make your appearance, basically?
Oh, I'm not really attending as many as you think. I
You're gonna
mean,
you're
I've
gonna
kind
do
of
the
made.
Buffalo? Are you gonna do the Buffalo Fest coming up, and the
No,
Corazon
it's
and
just there's
Supernova?
just there's too much, for me. And I have a lot going on. I have a full-time job in addition to this. Um, but pretty much I'll do the one we'll put on every year here is Slackfest. Um, that's become kind of a November tradition here, and I'll always be out at Supernova. This year, I'll be making a return to the Ska Brewing one out in Durango.
For the 30th
Um,
anniversary with Bite Me
yeah,
Bandy.
yeah. Guess they're announcing that next week sometime. Whoops, I think I let it slip.
I think it's already announced.
Oh, phew.
Yeah, it's
Oh no,
Voodoo, isn't it?
the
It's
show is
Voodoo.
announced, but not my
It's
not
Voodoo
my involvement. That I'm coming out and
because you got
you know,
brunt of it on it,
making
right?
it more fun
It's Voodoo, brunt of it, and Bambi, right? I think
for.
for the Scott Brewing 30th
No,
anniversary.
that is no. Scott Brewing is Less Than Jake. I should
Oh,
know something. Bite Me Bandy, Pie Tasters.
that's it. I'm sorry, I mixed
Yes,
them
yes, yes, yes.
up.
Um, but yeah, I haven't been out to California since I think the last time I saw you
Hmm.
face to face. Oh no, I saw you you came to the Blue Meanie show. So I
Oh
saw
yeah,
you
and
briefly
the
at them.
and your the American Gothic thing you had.
Yeah, yeah.
I was
So
I was pretty fucked up that day. I'm sure you know.
I'm glad you remember. Yeah, I'm not really traveling as much. I kind of want to. Um, some of the overseas ones, I may try to make out while I still have the energy to do it. I just have to get my passport. I'm just so bad at doing things like I haven't had a passport for over 20 years, maybe 25 years. I just have to get around to it. But then, I would totally like to see things like the Victoria Ska Fest or, the big specialized one that's every year. Um, I'd love to go to Montreal again because the Montreal Ska Fest is normally pretty cool. But I mean, there's so many fests now, right? That I mean, it's kind of, make your pick.
Except on the West Coast, we don't have any.
Well, yeah, but you have shows all the time, like
That's
pretty
true.
big
We do.
That
shows.
is true.
I mean, didn't like the Skylights just play there middle of the week, right? It was just,
Yeah,
didn't that just,
yeah, yeah. At St. Rock, they played.
yeah. So, I mean, you guys have a lot going on. And, you definitely have the jealousy when it's, those kind of cool, uh, shows where everyone sort of just participates for a few songs, whether it's a, tribute to Greg Lee or
Hmm.
this or that. I mean, they're just kind of the whole community kind of gets together, right? And it becomes a big sort of just celebration. You don't
Right.
know what's
Mhm.
coming out next. You don't know who's coming on stage next to sing what song. Those always make me jealous because those look like a lot of fun and do a lot of good for
Oh
the
yeah.
scene and the people. Yeah.
And it's funny because like a lot of the times in the crowd, you just look over and you see, like what's his name? Tony from No Doubt was at the Derek Morgan show or whatever the other day, and
Right.
just you'll just see all these like celebrities and stuff like that. It's like, what the hell? Even
You're
the
like, yeah,
band members,
dude.
the bands are fans of some of these bands.
Yeah,
Right, exactly.
they're right
They're
next to
watching, they're
you.
loving it. It's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
I mean, that's the way it was like back in the day when, there weren't so many ska fans. Everyone went to everyone's shows,
That's
right?
right.
And you would see, you know, ska punk oriented, bands all at the Skylight show, like paying homage to where this music basically came from. There
Mhm.
wasn't this strange division, like everyone went to everyone's shows. And at some point, maybe due to just the volume of bands,
Mhm.
everything's gotten kind of splintered and everything's gotten kind of segregated. And maybe that's a terrible word. Everything's just sort of chopped up. You have the kind of Cali roots reggae bands, but then you have these kind of reggae bands. You got these traditional ska bands. You have these ska punk bands. You have these
Mhm.
bands somewhere in the middle playing, kind of two-tony or something that you might have been on Moon, right? Something
Yeah.
that isn't
mm,
something that isn't so trad, but isn't so punk. It's somewhere in the middle, like you know,
And
eh,
then you've got one of your other bands that is like Mephistopheles, which is just straight up satanic ska.
yeah.
sure. But
You
I
got
mean,
Christian
that's the
ska, you
thing.
got
Like,
satanic ska.
sure, yeah, I guess that its own thing. But if I think of Mephistopheles as this kind of avant-garde jazz ska band, yeah,
Mhm.
it gets punky at times, but not in a predictable way, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're just so unique. They're so themselves. And whenever actually someone lumps Mephistopheles into just being a ska punk band, I'm like, nope, not letting you do it. They are so much more intricate and complex and nuanced.
Mhm.
Listen to the record again. If you cannot pigeonhole them just in this world, and sometimes I will like get bent out of shape about stuff like that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because I care, you
We've
know.
actually got them on Thursday. We're gonna be
Nice.
interviewing. Yeah, we're gonna be interviewing um I forgot the guy. What's his name? Andre, the singer, I forgot it. He goes by a different name. I guess I shouldn't say his real name.
Mm-hmm.
Um and a couple of the other guys. Um we saw Brunt of It and Stop the Presses the other day, and Brunt of It,
Nice.
like you were talking about earlier, spot on, man. They were
Yeah.
great. Now shows when bands come through your town, I've seen that you do put shows together strictly just for your bands and maybe some other local bands. Is that right? To help support them?
I do my best. We have one club that, Reggie's is very supportive.
Mhm.
For example, the room where you saw that
Coolidge.
eclectic show, basically like they give the entire door to the bands. I mean, their
Yeah.
production costs are so little in that room that you get 100 people in there and bands are, wait, what? How much are you paying me? I mean, and they're happy, right? I mean, that doesn't happen all the time, and it's just a very welcoming club where they feed all the bands. Everyone gets a meal, everyone gets drinks, And when you're a ska band, and there's a lot of you, just getting a complete meal for every member that has a lot of value,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's like a lot of value.
Yeah. Well, I was excited
So,
to go to that show because I had never seen State of Emergency.
right.
I've seen Sacco a few times, but
Mm-hmm.
Coolidge slash Sacco, and then God, you had somebody else on the bill.
They're the eclectics.
Oh, the Eclectics, duh,
I mean,
that's
the
right.
eclectics like a reunion, yeah.
Yeah, and I had never seen them too, which so it was awesome. And then I had never seen Weaker Youth Ensemble that opened for Blue
The
Meanies the
next
next
day,
day.
yeah,
That was
yeah,
awesome. That was
that was
truly
super
awesome too.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm like an old school ska nerd like you that wants to see these types of bands or buy those scofflaws or skunks records and stuff like that because we're the ones that remember that good time back then.
Mhm.
And
Oh,
we hear the
completely.
music and it takes us back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's still bands that are, on my, uh, bucket list to see, and you've obviously crossed a few off that year when you came out here.
Mhm.
And then, when I find out that they played a one-off show, and I just get really upset because I'm like, oh, if I would have, and you find out about it like a week later, right? You're like, what? Urban Blight played a show? This is
Oh.
ridiculous. I would have flown out for that. That happened a year or so ago. And it was because I was watching Buford O'Sullivan's like feed.
Mhm.
And he's like just taking video, like, oh, here I am at the Urban Blight show. I'm like, oh, cool.
Ah,
What? What? No, no. I got super upset.
I know I
And then
was bummed
immediately,
because I was bummed because I missed that Skanky Lizard show when I flew in there. It was the day
it
before.
was the day before.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a long weekend. That really was. Yeah,
Yeah.
they opened up for Stephen Marley. So that was,
Yeah.
yeah, it was a long weekend.
Yeah, I
Yes,
think
it
the
was.
next day, or a couple days after, I was actually at that amphitheater right there.
Well,
That's where they
okay.
have that big silver thing, right?
Right, with the bean.
Yeah, the bean. That's it.
The bean.
The
Yeah,
bean.
no, that was a good time. That was a good 3 days. God, I forgot I had this Phantom Lizard too.
Yeah. But that's so
No.
cool about your label too, is that you release a lot of these forgotten things like Rude Guest you did, a lot of their forgotten stuff, just stuff that you're passionate about. And that's
Yeah.
what people love is that you put out bands that you're just excited about. Who
What
cares?
was great? What was great about that Rude Guest, and in many ways the Skank and Lizard, less so the Skank and Lizard, but Rude Guest had zero presence on the internet. Like they had vanished from the face of the earth. And I only had seen them a couple times back in the day, but I went down some rabbit hole and someone put one of the tracks from the tape up online. And I said, man, this band was really good. And they had a lot of good songs. You know, I think I want to do like a vinyl release and I got to find these tapes. And it was kind of like I threw a Hail Mary out on Facebook just to see who in my Chicago network may or may not know how to reach them. And one of the actual band members' nephews was somehow in my network and said, it's my uncle
Uh-huh.
or my
Oh,
dad, or that was my dad or whatever. Like, yeah, I'll send him a message. He's not online. And then eventually he was literally here in this office and we were talking and he had brought all the tapes for me to get
Digitize
a
it.
really good rip. He had like unplayed tapes, like pristine ones.
Okay.
wow.
So I was able to archive it and save it and clean it up and put it out. And they did 2 reunion shows for me around the release. And the Reader did a big article on them. And the Reader also did a piece in the Secret History of Chicago Music, the partly illustrated, partly written, like a 60s kind of hippie diary. If you look at, there's a whole book that Steve Krakow does of all these lost treasures of Chicago music. So I reached out to him because I used to work with him years ago, and he did an illustration. Oh, it's on my wall. Let me go get it.
Take your phone. Take your phone.
Take your phone. Yeah.
Oh, I'll be right back. Oh, it's right here. Oh,
Gotta walk down
part
the
of the
long
problem.
hallway through the
Oh man,
warehouse.
these tacks have not been. Ah,
See what flyers he's got in the back there.
yeah. I hope this is really worth the wait.
Well, you could have taken your phone.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
So this is the thing. It's
that's in
partially
the record.
illustrated. Yeah, it's part of the record in
Yeah.
the end. Ouch! These are the tacks I couldn't get out of the wall.
Okay.
But now there's a history on the internet, and you can read about Rude Guest. And I felt really good about it again recently because one of the members recently passed away, and I don't think it was the same. And I couldn't find him. He came to one of these ska shows we did with a whole bunch of local bands, and he was trying to find me, but through somebody else, he passed along a message saying, my dad had just recently passed, but I wanted to thank you for having the history out there, on online now for people to know about the legacy of this band. Before that,
Mm.
it didn't exist. I'm like, oh wow. And I immediately thought, oh, that's why I sold 3 Rude Guest CDs over a weekend. Something you don't sell a lot of, and then all of a sudden in the same weekend, you're like, oh, something happened.
Oh.
And I think it was his dad, and he had come to the show. But you just sort of feel good that you've preserved this piece in time. This band was a band that played a lot, and they played during a time where there weren't many ska bands playing, and they were toughing it out, and you know, records last for the most part forever, um, unlike tapes. So I'm glad that there's records out there and CDs out there that can, continue to let people know about Rude Guests. Because they're great. They were
Yeah,
great.
it's good to pay homage to those bands, and then establish a footprint for them, which is pretty awesome. I commend you for doing that.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, that's part of the passion project of the label. Sometimes you just do things because you want to do it.
Uh-huh.
You don't have to run it up any flagpoles or get some bean counter to tell you that this is a good or bad move. It's like, no. And if I hemorrhage money, I don't care. If it sells 100 copies, I don't care.
Right.
It sold well enough, and it was over a long period of time. And I did actually feel really kind of sad when the last one sold.
No.
You know, oh, that one's
Oh,
done.
oh,
Because
it's
I
in the
think it was,
archives now.
yeah. Now it's just my archival. I did keep one though.
Oh, yeah, that's good. You gotta
Unlike
use
the
Good.
Peacock, I do have a copy.
Now, what is the hardest task that go into creating an album?
Uh, Sometimes it's just keeping the bands from losing their marbles in the process. It's
Oh,
talking a
okay.
lot of people. It's talking a lot of people off the ledge over and over
Oh.
again. Um, I think the hardest part is not that hard. It's just having someone who's on your team that can kind of guide you through the process because it is intimidating for a lot of people. And I'm not saying for me it's not become hard and it's not challenging, but there is a certain amount of, I don't want to say it's routine, but been using the same printer for 30 years, using the same mastering guy. There's
Mhm.
definitely certain things that are just cookie cutter for me. It's just I have the network and the network doesn't change. But every band has its own set of problems coming down for the final stretch.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're panicking, you know. They're about to go on tour on a certain date and they're the ones like, we're not going to make it, are we? I'm like, I didn't say that. Oh, okay, so we can still make it? Like, yeah. I mean, we're coming close to not making it, but at the moment, we're fine. And giving people, deadlines that they're going to miss because the actual deadline you needed. No, I mean, because the actual deadline you needed is 10, 12 days, 14 days later. It's
Oh.
playing this sort of this game of being a calming factor.
Mhm.
And for example, the Brunt of It record, you know, it shipped from the pressing plant the day before they were driving through Chicago to pick them up.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
It arrived the day before. It arrived like on a Thursday at 4 o'clock p.m. and they were driving through Chicago 8:30 in the morning on that Friday.
Wow.
So that
Wow.
was that was a nail biter. But I think I work with enough people where if my plant in Detroit said it's getting pressed on the Tuesday, it's going to cool overnight. It's definitely going to ship on the Wednesday. You're definitely going to have it on a Thursday. I have the confidence in that plant and that guy who I've been working with for decades that he's not going to miss it. You
Right.
know, um,
Mm.
and in some of these cases, you do ask favors. But a lot of these guys at these legacy plants that have been around for a while, they want to help a band on tour, right? That means something to them.
Of course.
Mhm.
So when you have this really tight deadline and you ask these guys like, can I pull a favor? Can you make sure this happens? If you have the right people working with you, you know, uh, they'll tell you what you need to hear. They'll calm me down.
Hmm.
Mm.
You know,
Mm.
I'm in the middle of one of these right now to get uh, this Bim Scala Bim Best of Volume 1 to Germany by, I gotta look at the calendar, like the 25th of April, and it's not pressed yet. But that guy's telling me it's going to get pressed the middle of next week. I'll have it ready to ship by the 18th, probably. And my FedEx rate will get it to Germany by like the 24th. So not a lot of, yeah, I'm looking at this calendar nervously, but and hopefully Dan Vitale won't be looking at this like, it better, man, it better be there. But I mean, it's the right people are gonna, work for you,
Yeah.
not against you, you know.
We were supposed to
Um,
interview him last week, but something came up with him, so we got to reschedule that one.
Yeah.
well,
Well, is that just going
down
to be
to
a
Panama.
German? What's that?
It's Panama time, You
Yeah,
just
I
gotta
know. Yeah. Um, uh,
whatever.
now, that's going to be just what, a German release?
No, I mean it's gonna be out worldwide.
Okay.
But I think for a lot of old timers, I mean, you have the tracks. I think it might have one extra track, but it's
Does it
one of
have
those
stuff
things.
from
Basically,
Does it have stuff
yeah, it's
from
basically
Boston
just one of
Ruby?
those. Yeah, it's one of those things for a tour for the new fans.
Mhm.
People who didn't buy the first couple records, and then there's going to be three different volumes.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, just to kind of keep their legacy alive.
Oh yeah. Well, I think I have everything except like one album from them. And they have a shitload of albums. They have like
They
13,
do. They do.
including Sonic Tonic
Right.
and
Exactly.
your new ones now. But you have a lot of deals with a lot of overseas companies that I've noticed. Grover, I believe Mad Butcher.
Yeah.
I don't know what other ones, but you bring a lot of these imports to the U.S. For the opportunity, for nerds like me that may never have the opportunity to purchase them or pay the astronomical prices of shipping.
Yeah. I mean, it's good for everybody.
Mhm.
That I have partners overseas that are keeping prices low for their customers. And
Mhm.
what a lot of people don't kind of realize is that, or they do realize it, I guess, is that you know the global economy is very unpredictable, as
Yeah.
we're witnessing over the past few weeks. And you know, if the currency change, whether the dollar strong, it's for years it's been a overly strong dollar. For a lot of Europeans, the records are too expensive, right, to buy from America because the dollar's too
Mhm.
strong. Shipping from America because the shipping sucks. So they much rather buy from somebody in their own country. But
Mhm.
if you're doing product swaps, right? So if I'm shipping Mad Butcher 200 pieces and he orders, a bunch of each of my titles, and we do this every six weeks or so, and I bring in a bunch of his stuff. It's kind of the key to that is, you know, our investment, I guess, for lack of a better term, in that imported product is basically that product plus the shipping, right? That we pay to get it to the other guy. So it's
Mhm.
almost like I treat Mad Butcher or Grover like jump up releases. I can price them like jump up releases, and offer people in the USA a good deal and not really worry about currency conversion. If all of a sudden I was just selling someone something in Germany, well, if the dollar's too strong, they don't want to buy it, you
Right.
know,
Yeah.
or vice versa. So if we're swapping all the time, we can control whatever price is necessary in our own market, and it
Exactly.
doesn't really ever come up that we're undercutting each other. It's basically, the reason why the undercutting doesn't happen is I think the shipping's just so bad, for shipping one record, right, to Europe or one record from Europe. It's just going to keep everyone pretty honest.
Mhm.
So if for some reason Mad Butcher put out my record for $2 cheaper, it's still not cheaper for somebody here. They're going to pay like $20 to ship it. So it,
Right.
Yeah.
it, it's it's self-policing, I think, and I think it's good business. And also, I think it's important that someone in the States is, you know, promoting foreign bands. I mean, that this is a global thing, right? We're not just, USA centric. It's not just about bands from here. And
Mhm.
in some ways, this year is kind of interesting because there's just so many international bands that I'm doing their editions for. I'm going to do a Los Fastidios edition of their new album Love Steady, and I'm doing the Lollipop Lori version, and I'm doing uh, something else that I'm forgetting. But a lot of them are for product on the U.S. tour when they come here for Supernova. They don't want to try to ship a bunch of European product here, and especially if tariffs have gone to hell, who knows what? I
Mhm.
mean,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
better for someone you know and trust in the States to say, "Hey, I'm going to make X amount of records. Your royalty records will be with me when I see you in Virginia for the first day,
Mhm.
and then you'll have them to sell at all your shows, and then hopefully you won't have a ton to take back, and you can just jump. You know,
yeah.
it takes a lot of the worry out of everything.
Right.
That's kind of smart. Yeah.
And
That.
for a band like Lollipop Lori, um, they're huge in Mexico. So it's a lot easier for me to make the records in the States, give them a bunch of records for their US tour, and then whatever, they don't sell through or whatever more they need. They just want me to ship them to Mexico. Like it's funny that a Russian band has me sending all of their royalty copies to Mexico.
Right.
That's where they've all gone. And that's
Yeah.
affordable, at
Yeah.
the moment.
I mean,
We'll
with the
see.
with the whole shipping thing too is it's going to take months to get one record or whatever.
Yeah,
Plus, what condition is it going to arrive in?
right.
Like
Yeah.
there was one album I've been looking for forever, and I finally found a copy. It was out of Japan. It was Mock Talk's second album
Oh
from
wow.
France, and I swear I paid like $80 for this damn record just because of the shipping, and then you had to pay these other costs for all this other
Um,
stuff. I think I don't know if I got scammed or what, but I have this. I have the record,
yeah.
and I've always wanted that record. I could never find it. So things like that.
I I can picture that record in my head, but I can't remember the name of it. I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. It's after Zippy. Zippy was the first
Uh-huh.
one. I forgot the second
Hmm.
one.
Yeah.
But yeah, all that kind of stuff. Jose, I think is it you?
Yeah. What has been the biggest challenge in running an independent label in today's music industry?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm laughing. It's not a bad question. It's a very good question, which is why I'm laughing. The
Okay.
challenges, the the challenges change all the time, and
Okay.
I think the biggest challenge is to always expect the unexpected. I know that sounds freaking cliche, but hear me out. So, you know, uh, a lot of us have been kind of fueling the vinyl resurgence, right? We've been, going mostly all vinyl for a long time, like
Mhm.
since
Mhm.
2010. You know, I ran distributors that had to focus on vinyl because the CDs had pretty much died at retail, and the handful of stores that were left around the country were surviving on a very small amount of labels that put out vinyl, and a lot of that vinyl were indie rock labels that were keeping people alive and keeping stores alive and keeping the interest in vinyl alive. And you constantly saw it grow, and it was growing at a healthy rate. And then at a certain point, you just sort of realize that, oh, the cat's out of the bag. The major labels can figure this out. It's only going to be a matter of time where they're going to use their power and influence and money to kick people like me out of lines and getting their records pressed over other people's records. So it's those kind of challenges, like knowing that you can never be comfortable. Something is going to change that, and you need to kind of prepare for the worst at all times. So vinyl sales kept increasing and kept increasing, and it was at a healthy rate, and the majors started to get involved. They weren't getting totally involved, but they started to. And you started to think, well, as long as Jack White's records are the best-selling records at the end of the year, we're all safe, right? If selling, 75,000 units over an entire year is the best-selling vinyl record, then I think we're all in a good spot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then the pandemic happened, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden everyone had free money and everyone was at home, and then people started to, buy turntables because, well, not a whole lot else you could do.
Mm-hmm.
And then records were just selling like crazy.
Mm.
You didn't have to do anything. They just sort of sold like mad. Like when I was actually in the hospital with COVID, with the really bad case of COVID, I'm like, oh, am I going to die? And I just kept like looking at my phone, like, I got to pack all these goddamn orders. I literally would look at my phone. I'm like, oh, God damn it. So much work. And I'm sitting there like having oxygen put in me. I'm starting to come out of it. And so just records just sold on their own, and then everyone's just sort of, the cat was out of the bag, and
Yeah.
2021 came out, and everyone who couldn't tour, right, and recorded at home,
Mm-hmm.
and then they wanted their records to come out in 2021 and 2022, so all the plants were busy, and you remember you have those 10-month to 12-month delays,
Mm-hmm.
all this stuff, and for me, all of that was predictable. All of that I saw coming, and
Wow.
I had, kind of made sure that you know, uh, my relationships with a few key pressing plants were solid. That these were people who weren't going to just roll over and take major label money and
Mm-hmm.
let them run amok for 24 hours a day on all your presses and kick little guys like me out. I worked with people who refused to take that money, who were not going to uh, abandon all the indie labels that kept them in business all this time.
Mm-hmm.
And you know at certain times, doing favors for people, like, hey, I got this printer, he's got this new plan, he's got this lower rate, everyone helping each other, and I think that's made everything stronger again. But once again, you are now able to make records with very few delays
Mm-hmm.
because the capacity has opened up. There's so many new pressing plants, but a lot of these new pressing plants don't have enough business to stay in business. There's just too
Mm.
many of them went online too quickly. And now
Right.
that we
So,
see that the vinyl is kind of flattening out, you've got plants that literally bought 12 machines and only are running 3, haven't even taken 9 out of a crate, and
wow.
eventually the bank will come asking for their money and you will lose those machines. And that kind of stuff is happening all the time now, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And so, we're at a point where, easy to get records made, but there's so much product that it's getting harder to sell records, So you kind of just have to
Yeah.
watch your bottom line, and there's been multiple times this year where I went to artists. I said, look, I know we've sold, you know, 700, 800 copies of your previous records. It got pressed a couple times. Don't take it as an insult if I start with 400. They're like, oh, okay, why? I'm like, things are slowing down.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of those people that bought your first record 10 years ago, they're not around anymore, or they have some excuse. I don't have enough, shelving for any more records. I stopped buying 5 years, whatever it is, you can't assume that what happened in the past is the blueprint for the future.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Right.
you do kind of need to talk to artists and say, look, it's not a bad thing. We just have to make fewer. Can always make more,
Right.
if the demand is there. But, things have changed, and it's just
Right.
sort of that constant, reassessing the marketplace, and as my job working at a, record vinyl distributor, I talk to stores all the time who buy other kinds of product, whether it's, internet, hip hop or indie rock or this or electronic music, that, and you hear, what's going on. And last summer, when kind of everything slowed down immediately, like I was hearing from so many stores that no one was walking in the through their front door. What's going on? It would like literally hit everyone last year in the
Mm.
summer. And by having that kind of, you know, information, I can say, oh, well, there's a change. Now in the summer, people spend all their money, like music fans, all their money on going to festivals.
Hmm.
Yep.
Like you were asking me, what festivals are going to? I mean, if you're in like my world, right, or the ska or ska adjacent ska punk world, look at all the festivals you could be going to. You could be going to, the Punk in the Park Denver thing, or the like you said Buffalo Ska Fest, or Punk Rock Bowling, or the Fest. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're going to all of them, well, you have no money left,
Yeah, true.
and that's basically the summer, right? So the summer
Yeah.
is now all about spending money on experiences. And that changed a couple years ago after the pandemic, where, you see all those articles written, people spend money on experiences and not things. And when you read things like that, like, I better press a little bit less to start,
Mhm.
or I'm not going to release records in the summer
Hmm.
because no one's going to be buying stuff online. Now, if
Right.
you're a band and you have a new record out, if you can get to the fans, right, playing these festivals, people will buy them at the show. I mean,
Right.
people buy records at shows all the time because it makes them feel like they're helping, right?
And
All the
connected.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but for a label, it's tough because during the summer, no one's going to be buying with the same sort of, you know, excitement. They're just going to wait for the band to come through, which is good for everybody, good for the band. But, so you have to kind of pick your battles.
Mhm.
And I've put out, I think it was a couple of years ago when I did the Backyard Superheroes and the Operators. I told both of them earlier that year, like, if it doesn't come out by June 10th, it's not coming out to the fall.
Okay.
We need to stay clear of the summer. Now, you're going to get the records out, you're going to play in the summer, you're going to sell them well, but I need it to come out before everyone is just too, you know, engrossed in other things and travel and everything.
Right.
And now that's become like a general rule for me. Like these new records have to come out, not even like end of June. Like that's already too late. Like middle of June, like June 10th. It's these kind of things that I've had to adapt to, over and over again. Or you have to have some record that's so bulletproof that you can put it out in the middle of the summer. Or a
Mhm.
band that doesn't tour at all that just has this kind of, cachet. So like I think it was last summer I did a deal with Easy Star and Loving Paupers to do the dub version of their album.
Mhm.
That did great because that's sort of a very niche market, like a super, super niche. I mean, it just, you could just sort of feel that, like, okay, this is going to be bulletproof because none of these people are going to be planning on seeing this band. This band never leaves the East Coast. As many times I've tried to offer them shows in Chicago, I can't get them here. You know, um, and sometimes you could do like a passion project in the middle of summer. I think I might have released that one year the Skank and Lizard during the summer because, you know, a Skank and Lizard fan is from 1977 to 1982. I mean, like either they find me or they don't.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
Good.
but it's interesting because you got to just always, in some ways, it's always assuming that what's working now is not going to work in the
Yeah.
future, and I'm just sort of adapting. You
Right.
know,
You
and
you also, but you also, I mean, besides that, I'm sorry to mean to cut you off, but I don't want to forget. Besides vinyl, you've got cassettes, you've got CDs, and you have 8 tracks. Like who
I've
does
only got
that?
a couple of 8 tracks. Do I have one here? Oh no, they're in the back.
And besides those formats, you also release reggae, punk, some emo stuff, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I
How's
mean,
that? Is that early stuff that you did? Do you still incorporate some of that in there?
once again, it kind of just I think the interesting thing is that for years, after kind of ska took its took its nosedive at the end of the 90s. And in the early 2000s, I kind of saw that the ska fan that was going to stick it out was going to be more of the traditional leaning fan. Like, those are not the ones that jumped on the bandwagon late. They were there before, and they're going to stick it out.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the CDs that I put out in the early 2000s were very traditional based, and in many ways that continued for most of the 2010s. Um, Now, what ended up happening, I think, is people maybe saw Jump Up as being only a traditional ska and reggae label, and that was never really the plan. It's just sort of what came about on how the fans were, reacting to things, and who I saw was my core customer base.
Mm-hmm.
And then things kind of the pendulum switched back, right? So you had a lot of the 90s punkier ska bands, the ones that we both grew up with, the ones we both love. We love them just as much as we love a band like the Scatolites or the Slackers, or you name it. They started to kind of come back around the block again,
Yeah.
putting out new records, right? And the fact that a Less Than Jake can continue putting out new records, or a Buck-O-Nine, you name it, those bands are still around. And or Real Big Fish. I mean, I've lost track of. There's many Real Big Fish records I've never really listened to and owned because they kept going, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I kind of lost a little interest, I'll be honest, and I don't know a lot of those later records, but they were still going.
Right.
So those bands still going out there finding new fans. Buster Plug, Suicide Machines, they never stopped. Did kind of fuel the interest in these younger bands
Mm-hmm.
playing the ska punk sound, and labels like Bad Time were on top of it. Lots of great new bands, and people ask me all the time, like, well, how does that affect you? I said, I look at someone else putting out ska records as an opportunity for me, not necessarily competition in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And in many ways, it gave me the opportunity to put out some of these more punk oriented ska bands that I couldn't really easily touch because I wasn't absolutely sure how much of a fan base was out there ready to embrace some of these new bands. So as I saw other labels putting out new bands and doing all right, I'm like, hey, I could put out a Stepdaughters, or I could do that Too Hectic Comp, or a Backyard Superheroes, or a Brunt of It. And there were some people that were surprised, like, wait, you're putting out ska punk records? I'm like, dude, did you not see what I put out in the 90s? Like, I have every right
Yeah.
to kind of,
Like that Scholars and Telegraph one. Love that
right.
album.
I mean, these bands, I was there at the beginning of all this too. So,
Mm-hmm.
I'm now finding this kind of comfortable, middle ground where every so often something like a Brunt of It comes my way, or a Backyard Superheroes, or Stepdaughters, or whatever other ones I put. And I'll say, hey, I like this. I want to do this. And, a lot of times I'll talk to these bands. I say, look, I know that maybe you think that I'm more of a traditional ska label. That may be true statistically, but I'm going to work just as hard pushing this. And I think I'm going to have a lot of luck because there are people like you and me, who aren't just so cookie cutter one way. You'll buy many different sounds, and in some ways, I'm always afraid of, being the champion of all but master of none. That's the worry of putting out too many different type of things.
Right.
But I can afford to do that. I'd like for someone to come who buys a Brunt of It record that has the opportunity to buy a Scatolites record at the same time, or vice versa.
Right.
And there's not many places where that can happen organically.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
Like that person did that massive mail order like a month ago. It was so exciting to see someone buy, like Manglewood, and then Dope Times, like, and the way my kind of shopping cart, loads, it loads kind of in a stream of consciousness, right? So these are the records you put in for some reason in that order. So right after you said, "Oh, I want to get this new Manglewood import," oh yeah, I want to check out this Dope Town band. Here's two of those, and then it's like Scandalites. It's like it's Bizarro,
Did they
but
pick up the Jay-Z one too?
and out of those. But
Oh, yeah.
the Hall and Oates has done pretty good with the
Oh,
Black
really?
Market Dope people. Yeah. And it's things like that, where I'm sure there's some people who, for a while saw the Jay-Z on the site. Oh, like, what is this shit? What is this shit? I'm like, okay, well, maybe you don't get it or it doesn't interest you now, but maybe eventually
Hmm.
you'll realize that this was kind of really interesting and different. And, you know, a lot of these people like come around years later,
Hmm.
like, oh my God, now I get it, because their taste changed and their taste becomes, more and more diverse, and people ask me all the time, like, oh, what are you currently listening to? Like, it's all over the place, I'll get into these, I'll get into these rabbit holes where I'm trying to find bizarre mashups, that exist in very boutique label kind of pressings, or I'll, be listening to like dubstep for a while, and but good dubstep, not, and it's just really hard to say, and I'll be obsessive about something for like a very like short period of time, like this Five Green Moons record. Just look it up. It's kind of just really interesting electronic reggae.
Uh,
It's just a
Okay.
bizarre, you know. I'd
is
just
that
be
something
into it.
that's coming out soon, or it's already out?
No, it's on some like European label that we carry here at work.
Hmm.
Uh, so it's just sort of interesting stuff. Um,
5 minutes. Okay.
yeah, and then I've been listening to like The Bug, even though like The Bug's albums on Ninja Tune are like 10 years old. I've just sort of recently reappreciate like all this bizarro electronic dancehall stuff. So it's really hard to say. And saying that, I'm actually going to be putting out some 45s that have jungle mixes on the flip this
Okay.
year,
Huh.
and I'm
Okay.
very excited about that because one of these managers that manages Dhaka Skanks, the English band, also manages Benny Page, the jungle producer, and we're going to try to work on some kind of series where there's jungle mixes on the flip side of some of these 45s.
Yeah,
So
that's cool.
kind of giving like a very unique British take on maybe some of the more dance hall or rootsy reggae things um, that existed previously only in like one style, like something that would just blow your mind, like when someone puts this on, like what is going on, and just sort of changing people's interests slowly, chipping
Nice.
away at it.
Nice. Now, how do you support artists in their career development beyond just releasing their music?
Can you be more or less specific?
um, yeah, I'm. How do you support them? I guess just
Like
uh,
maybe how do you back them up? Like
yeah.
do you get them give them a roster of different places to call to shows? Do you get them in contact with a booking agent? What
the
else do you
booking
do
agent
beyond?
thing the booking agent thing is tough these days because most people just book their own, but I think what you kind of get um, when you have a record put out by me is you get this possible network that could go into action pretty quickly, on the turn of a dime,
Mhm.
and magic can happen. So, not to harp on the brunt of it, stop the presses thing again, but I mean that literally all came about with you know brunt of it and stop the presses both basically messaging me within the same week with ideas of touring on the West Coast. Now, I think Stop the Presses was a little bit more seasoned and used to, contacting a lot of these places they had been before,
Mhm.
but they liked the idea of Bruntavit kind of jumping in because, Boofish originally from Hoodlum Empire, so he's got this other kind of world where he could reach out to people, and then all of a sudden you got a bunch of 50-year-olds at the show too. But he also has kind of this, DIY, streak to him that like I want to play shows in crazy ass play. I want to move furniture first and then play a show. Like if I'm not moving furniture, this show may be too cool. Not cool enough for me. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But it was one of those things like, well, maybe the two of you can make this work. I mean, you're flying out and doing a bunch of shows, but like Bruntavit might want to drive out, and then all of a sudden it just
Yeah.
I'm in the chat thread and I'm just seeing all the, they don't really need my input. I mean, these guys know what they're doing, and I'll on and off chime in and say, look, at any point if you guys need me for something, make a call, someone that I know better, just let me know. But
Mm.
you guys seem to have this, going pretty good on your own. But I'm here for whatever you need, support, and sometimes, a show is as simple as, oh, I know that person better, let me do it. So case in point, the prize fighters are going out in July,
Yeah.
coming out your way.
I know. I know.
Nice.
John. I think John Roy's got him on a show.
Yeah, exactly. They're coming
Um.
out your way,
Yeah.
and they're trying to route, through, Colorado, and for example, they were like, "Oh, we want to play at Ska Brewing. It's on like a Wednesday. We're not hearing back, not hearing back." I'm like, "I'll take it from here,"
Yeah.
And not like I have any magic wand. It's just they see an email from me, you know. I don't
Hmm.
send many messages, and we're already talking about me being part of the anniversary show, and something that, there's no response. All of a sudden, it's like, "What do you want? Oh, you
Yeah.
want that Wednesday? Okay. What do it's just done. So it's kind of like we're all just sort of trying to do our strengths, you know, and that's the kind of support it is. I tell bands all the time that you may be better at promoting the social media on a daily basis than I will be because I am a 55-year-old, guy, and I don't wake up thinking how or what am I going to post on a daily basis. I will post every so often when I have something new and interesting, but I'm not thinking about the algorithm 24/7. Now, not to say that me posting something every so often, there's certain people who will see that, in a different network than, a band posting on their network or on other things. And, even me and like guys in Bruntavit, we were still trying to figure out what post was the most effective for the Mighty Mighty Bosstones that all of a sudden like saw this record, heard this record, right, and went on their social media recommending it as the best ska punk record that they've heard in decades.
Yeah.
Like
Nice.
I didn't reach out to Dickie Barrett. I don't know how to reach out to him. I'm not going to pull that nonsense. But I think, if he saw it like on some sort of post that I did, and it was just the right place at the right time, I think a post coming from Jump Up, being a legacy label, will have some weight, and
Yeah.
it may get someone to try something, that who might not have in the past, and you
Mhm.
know, he was sharing certain Instagram posts that were screenshot from mine. I'm like, oh my lord, that's pretty interesting. I didn't know you followed me. Like, like someone can follow you, but not follow you. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right. Right.
Um, so it's things like that. We're just all trying to use our own strengths, and sometimes the routing stuff is best left to the bands. They know what will work and what will not work, and what tour, when you look at it, like, we will hemorrhage money on that tour and we will come back so broke, you know, that we should or should not do this. They can make those decisions, right? And like, I can't force a band to go on tour with a band, a bigger band, when you know that they're, making maybe $300 a show.
Right.
And I can't ask people to lose money. Like, if touring and the little bit of pay and the hopes of selling records or T-shirts is fulfilling, for you artistically, then go do it. But I will never ever tell a band, "Oh, your record did poorly because you chose not to tour."
Mm.
Mhm.
Because I'm a realist. Like, you have big artists canceling tours all the time. You
Mhm.
have big mid-level artists canceling tours all the time because it's just financially not feasible.
Mhm.
Everything is more expensive than it used to be, and I will never, ever blame the lack of touring for a record not selling. In fact, I think part of my mindset to put out a record is to know that I can move those units over time without touring. Like, I'm almost assuming you're not going to tour, because that's a lot easier for me to work with than me betting the farm that you're getting in a van and you're losing money 5 out of 7 days in a week. For what? For me? No. If it makes sense for you, then do it. And that's why I think a lot of these bands that, on Jump Up at my level, they all are kind of working in the same frame of that kind of mentality. Like, we're not getting rich off this, but we can help each other. We can cohabitate. We can be, symbiotic, working together because we're all in the same boat. Um,
And
yeah,
it's
because
great.
to
It's
ask someone
great
to
for
go,
the
yeah,
experience for the bands too.
oh, totally. But
You've
like,
got you've got
literally,
to tour. You've got to have the ups and downs.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
but literally when a band tells me like, oh, we're going on tour, here are dates, I'm like, really? Wow, that's awesome.
Why those dates?
All right. Well, good job.
Now, your radio show is from Wednesdays from 9 to 10
Yeah.
Central Standard Time. Tell
Yes.
us about, you touched base on that a little, that you did it in college. So you started around what year doing that?
1989.
89. So you've been doing this straight without,
No, that whole pandemic thing happened,
right.
and they wouldn't let us old timers into the station. And you know, uh, I did have the option of like pre-recording and uploading, but this isn't meant to sound like a slight, but I literally tell people like, yeah, I can't do that. I'm not a podcaster. This isn't a podcast. People who met me over the years and know me understand that there's a certain stream of consciousness, there's a certain live aspect to my aura, my existence, and that's been the radio show
Yeah.
all these years. Like, I go in, with a pile of CDs and LPs, and there are all these different kind of styles, and I don't really have a plan, uh, unless a band's playing town, right? That coming up where I'll play their music. That'd be the closest thing to a game plan for the radio show that I ever have. It's like, oh, Save Ferris is coming to town. I better play some Save Ferris. Talk about the show, that kind of stuff. Um,
Mhm.
but it's all stream of consciousness. It's all off the cuff. I'll play like one record or I'll play a CD, and it's almost like you're DJing, right? Because you are DJing, you're flipping through what will be interesting, what makes sense after this. And that's why I can't be in a situation where I'm, after hours, you know, with a pile of records. I think I overthink it. I think
Mhm.
it, what I'll say will come out very stoic, and what I play will seem very, you know, calm, and not. I can't challenge myself if it's pre-recorded. I really do like the live aspect of doing the radio show. That's the way it used to always be. before technology took over. And I kind of want people to mostly come on that journey with me as I'm doing it live. So every so
Mhm.
often I'll remember to record the show and I'll upload it, but I'm really bad at it. And, honestly, it's best that, you may not listen to every one of my radio shows, which is fine. But I'd rather the few that you do listen to, you're listening to it live as I do it because I think I bring a certain energy to the show that a lot of these pre-recorded podcast sort of things don't. Um, and what people don't realize is a lot of radio is a lot more time sensitive, right? It's an hour. You have certain rules you follow. You don't, you play a certain amount of songs and you take a break, and maybe you say something interesting about one of the records more than others, but you play certain singles. I mean, there's a rhythm, there's an ebb and flow, there's a pacing, and I think a lot of these pre-recorded shows that are kind of like radio shows, they're not radio shows because they don't have this um, urgency to them, right? A certain urgency of an hour-long radio show is apparent, and I think it's more exciting, than something pre-recorded. But that's my opinion.
And then
Probably
also you
plenty of
do
people.
you DJ over at Delilah's for ska night too, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I've been doing that for since 1994,
Oh wow. So
Wow.
is that
and
just you as a DJ, and do you also have a band play?
no, just
Just
me
you.
DJing. And it's like I say, it's long form. So I mean, I think part of what's changed about DJing these days is there's this push, and a lot of the initial push came from clubs that they wanted teams, right? And they wanted teams because they wanted everybody DJing that night to reach out to their social media and get their friends and family out. And the long form, one DJ, 5 hours, that's a rarity now.
Right.
And I don't think, a lot of people know how to actually do it anymore. I mean, because you have to keep people there. You have to keep people's interest for
Yeah.
5 hours,
Yeah.
for 5 hours,
Yeah.
and there's a certain science to it. Once you get them to midnight, you're most likely going to get them there till 1 a.m. And
Mhm.
if you play something, an interesting mix at 1 a.m., you got them till closing, um, and there's a science to it, and you can't just play the same tempo all the time. And you got to kind of go up and down. You got to play some things they know and sneak in things they don't know, and a mashup here, a cover there. I mean, it's really hard to tell people that you can't do what I do.
Mhm.
I mean, you really can't. I mean, so many of these nights are based upon five DJs coming in, each doing 30 to 45-minute sets.
Mhm.
And it's different. It really is totally different. And what's kind of interesting about Delilah's is, yes, it's always been billed as a ska reggae night, but there's a lot of people who just come to Delilah's because it's a cool bar that plays cool music. So the majority of the people that come through Delilah's aren't necessarily ska reggae fans, but I've got to make them, at least for that night, ska
Yeah.
reggae fans, you know. And if I come in, I see it's a mostly college crowd, early 20s. There's an interesting challenge there of what to play, or I see a bunch of older dudes at the bar. They want to hear different things, and to kind of keep everyone happy and everyone there till 2 a.m.
Mhm.
Is very nuanced. Um, and if that night was broken up into five DJs, each doing 45-minute sets, the place would be empty
Yeah.
because there's no continuity, there's no flow, there's no, attempt to keep people there interesting. Like there was these dudes who I think they were from Mexico last month, and they were there all night, you know, and I'd never seen them before. They were older, maybe not 50s, but definitely 40s. And they were just like enjoying themselves. And they came to me at the end of the night and they literally said, like, we came here a little bit before 10 p.m. and you were doing more English, two-tone, faster stuff, you know. and we got our adrenaline up, and then you kind of slowed it down. I mean, they literally were basically telling me what I did that night,
Yeah.
like the pacing. And
You
this
you were
was
the soundtrack to their night.
right. This was almost 2 a.m. He was basically saying like, "Oh, you had a good time." He's like, "Well, you did all kinds of things, and you did all this, weird like '70s disco covers at this point, and then you went back to doing this, and then it was alternative, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I did tonight." He's like, "We just like that it was all over the place.
Right.
It
It's
wasn't
like a
just all
science.
right. It wasn't just all two tone. It wasn't just
Mhm.
all old reggae. It wasn't all just this. Because they weren't they liked ska and reggae, but they weren't like fully immersed in it, and they just liked the variety, and it kept them there all night. And
Mhm.
I think that's a lost art now because all these places are forcing people into doing like team DJ stuff, and it's been happening for 10 plus years. And some of my house music, electronic music DJ people have the same gripes, or they were used to getting hired for doing a 5 6 hour night,
Mhm.
them controlling the room, doing that. And a lot of these clubs would switch and just say, "Oh no, well, we're doing teams. You need to have 3 or 4 people in a night." It's like, why?
Right.
Like, I've been doing this for 20 years. I can command the room for 5 6 hours.
Mhm.
Like, we're just switching things up. And like, it's because they want the social, right, sharing, and they want everyone to bring other people. And I can understand that, but that's also like not understanding that you know there is an art to it, and if the art is done right, those people will come and stay and tell people and come the next time. They're just assuming that it's all one and done, and I've got to share this with all my friends, and they're all going to come, and mathematically, these 5 DJs will bring 100 people. So, it's just gotten kind of that. It's gotten that shitty
Yeah.
nationwide.
Now, are there any upcoming releases from the label that you're especially excited about?
Woo!
That you could
So,
talk about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That you can talk about.
anything. I mean, a lot of, I am very excited about, some of these kind of jungle remixes and this
Uh,
45, series that I'm going to be doing. Uh, because a lot of people don't know is when I was in the 90s working at another distributor, I actually did a lot of jungle buying, like early days stuff. So a lot of
oh,
people, yeah. So I do kind of have that in my DNA from back in the day, like talking on the phone with Congo Natty and doing ordering in the '90s when he would play it over the phone. I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, that's great. I'll take 30 of that. I'll take 20, that kind of stuff. You know,
yeah.
um, so that's kind of interesting. Um, what else do I have coming out? I'm actually a little bit bummed because some of the stuff that I have coming out, a lot of it is American edition of European bands that are, and I'm not bummed about it. It's just,
Mm,
you know, I'm helping these bands with their American tours and their releases. I'm excited about these releases, but it's not the same way, right? Because these are releases that were going to exist already, and these are bands that were, semi-established, and they've already kind of, taken it to a certain level, and I'm just sort of facilitating another version of it.
Mhm.
It's not like I discovered a band, uh, saw them live, saw it really click, tell them I really want to put out the record and see it finally come out. Like I have a lot more fulfillment from seeing it from the very beginning to the end. And I don't really have a lot of those releases currently on 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 the schedule. And it's not because I'm not trying, it's just nothing has really, you know, struck yet. Um, I'm doing the new Red Stripes album from Hong Kong.
Mhm.
I like them a lot. Uh, and that's, a band that I've been talking to for a while. And they're actually assembling an all Asian ska compilation bands that they played with, all across Asia. You know, um, what else do I have? I mean, yeah, it's just sort of, you know, they come out when they come out, and sometimes you'll catch me on a good day. Like if, one day, you could talk to me like a couple years ago. I'm like, oh, I'm putting out this band from Jakarta, and I'm putting out this band from South Korea, the skinhead reggae band from South Korea. And I'll have all these things that I'm, immersed in. And I think maybe because I just put out like the Attractors and the Brunt of It and the new Buford O'Sullivan record, and I just put out a bunch of stuff. I guess I'm still excited about those records because I'm still seeing those get to the next level.
Right.
Um, but yeah, there's always something. Like the Prize Fighters are working on a 45 that we're putting out for the tour. Um,
Well, I'm almost certain that when the prize fighters come through, I know when the prize fighters come through here, just like most every other jump up band, there will be a
yes,
promo
the
CD.
Sampler.
So
Yeah,
you have like the most samplers that I know of. These are just some that I have. The Drink
trying to
with
see where the
Bob.
latest one is. Well, you have the most recent one,
Got
right? The one from Supernova. Oh man, I'll put that in your next
this
order.
one. I've got
Oh wait, there's a whole
for
bunch of you. Here's
Chunky.
some
Not
old
even
ones.
looking.
Here's
So
like,
that this one. Hold on. I got this one. You got the beach one. What is it? On the beach or something? On the beach.
yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, that
The
was a
record
fun one.
heat
Yeah.
one, right? The record heat one's your last one, your
Yeah.
newest one, right?
Yep, the last one. Yeah, we had the We Do the
But
Skas and
this
we drink
this is my
champagne.
favorite that I asked you for in one of the orders
Which
is
one?
the Rude
Oh
Girls
yeah, those are
80s
great.
edition.
hmm
Yeah.
I
So,
mean,
but
those
you
samplers. I mean, those samplers are kind of like my. I spent a lot of time, sequencing those samplers,
uh
and I still think that the CD is a great format for introducing people to new bands affordably. And the reason why I'd always launch a new one at Supernova every year is because so many people would drive to Supernova, and still there were plenty of old cars that had CD players in it. That if I give you a really good sampler and you recognize a handful of the bands that might have played, and if I get you to put that in as your first thing when you're leaving, a festival in your happy mood, I've got you for the full 77 minutes, right?
yeah,
I'm not
Yeah.
competing with Spotify, not competing with this or that. Like I've got you. I've got you. And if that CD is sequenced in a almost like my DJ night at Delilah's in a way that's very listenable and pleasurable, you're going to discover a lot of new music,
yeah,
and not competing with a million other people, with the internet and Spotify. So I love those samplers, and I spend a lot of time, like I said, on the sequencing. Like
mhm,
I'll sit there and I'll have like a version that I think I like, and then I'll wake up the next morning and listen to it again and switch a bunch of things.
yeah,
I'll like it, and eventually, it'll come to the point where I have to get the master done, and I will make the final decision on the pacing of the last two songs or this or that, and I think a lot of people do enjoy those samplers, and there's people who like yourself have all of them probably,
yeah,
and I'll continue to keep making them because I think it's just great, and it also I think whether these youngins know it or not, um, the CD compilation is part of the history of ska music. I
Yeah.
mean, we all learned and discovered new bands from CD compilations. So some of these youngins that are listening to it, they're accidentally taking a trip down nostalgia. Like the this is as important, I think, to somebody as maybe Give 'em a Boot was, right?
yeah,
To you or me, or a Moon Ska comp, or American Gothic One, or this or that. Like
yep.
I want to keep the ska compilation alive any way possible.
Well, what I really like about this one that you did was this was to complement Heather's book, wasn't it?
Yeah. hmm
Yeah, and you could
And
only
I
get
did
that with
one
Heather's.
with
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I did one with Mark Wasserman too for his
Yeah.
Ska Boom book.
Yeah, he gave me that tape when he was here.
Yeah, and it's kind of fun, and for me, it's easy for me to do, um, and I like the fact that like the one for Heather's book, it's mixed.
Mhm.
Like it's a mix. You put it in, and it's almost like you're at my Delilah's night.
Yeah.
You know? And in fact, the Mark Wasserman one was
And
made at Delilah's.
I have that.
And the reason why that one was made at Delilah's is because Delilah's was still closed for COVID at the time. Yeah,
America.
that's the one. And I always like making the tape versions of those too.
Yeah.
But yeah. So Delilah's was closed for COVID, and they were doing all kinds of renovations. But it was at that point in COVID where we were leaving our houses, we were just masked, and I, said to Mike Miller at Delilah, I said, I have to make this mix for a book, and I'll never get around. And it's the same reason why I can't podcast. I'll never get around to it. Like in my office, I need it to be organic and live. Can I come into Delilah's and just do an hour long mix, like a 77-minute mix live?
Yeah.
Just record it. Nobody in the place. So it's not quite as exciting as if the room was full of people, but it's me still sitting there at the turntables, just doing it live, one take, ripping it, and then making a copy. So yeah, that Skaboom one was done at Delilah's while it was still closed for COVID because apparently I need to do things live and on the spot.
What I love about
I
some
will
of
not
these,
change.
I'm sorry. What I love about some of these too is you got a lot of bands from when you and I were both younger. You got Bigger Thomas, Class Action, Plato Shrimp. You've got
Yeah.
SLK, 6 Feet Under, Pressure Boys. Holy crap!
Yep.
You got a
That was
bunch of old school bands that people wouldn't really even hear of nowadays.
right. Yeah. And we went all in, So I made 1,000 of that Skaboom CD,
Mhm.
and it did help, you know, uh, Mark kick out, 1,000 books right from the get go.
Yeah,
It's hard to sell 1,000 of something now. It really is, especially a very niche book on 80s American ska. But you know what Mark didn't realize, I guess, is what a nut I am for that era, and how I like the fact that the book can only cover certain things, but there's a whole wealth of other bizarro bands that were isolated from each other, but
hmm
all playing some sort of ska, during the 80s. And that's what I wanted the mix to be. I wanted the mix to be, oh, wow, I thought I knew a lot of stuff. And then I listened to this and said, there's a lot more out there.
right.
And then when I came out to that Grammy Museum event and DJ'd all the weird old 80s ska 45s, there was some guy who came up who was, part of the, Box Boys world, right? Was from
Yeah.
that era, went to see him all the time. And he came up and said, I don't know anything you're playing tonight, but I love it all.
I think that guy was
Nice.
sitting in front of me.
And
I can't remember which guy that was.
I said, that's awesome. He's like, what is this stuff? I'm like, well, here's the pile of records. You can just start taking pictures if you like. Spread them out if you like.
Uh-huh.
So he just started to sort of take pictures of a few, and um, that's what I like. I like that made this guy maybe excited again for ska,
Yeah.
Mm.
that there was still a lot to be discovered, you know.
One of my highlights from that Grammy Museum was getting a photo with Larry Fishburne. That was
Oh
pretty
yeah,
awesome.
that was wild. I mean, that was it was a wild
It's like,
scene, you know.
how does Lawrence Fishburne, I guess now,
Yeah,
go up because he was such a ska fan of the Box Boys back in the 80s?
I mean, it's nuts.
I
I
know,
mean,
it's
it's totally
awesome.
bonkers. It's totally bonkers.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
that was
really is.
a cool day.
Yeah. No, that was a great event,
Yeah,
and I think when like Eric again, like, I want to fly out for this, I'm gonna do this. He's like, really? I'm like, yeah,
yeah.
but you gotta use me. You gotta use me. Like, I'm going to do this. And well, okay. I'm like, no, I'm serious. Do not. It's like, no, we know you're serious,
Yeah.
and we will let you do this. And yeah, it was a great time. That was really good.
Now, I got one last question. What
Whew.
has been some of your most successful collaborations and what makes them special?
Like long term?
Yeah.
Special. I think still the most special things to me are the ones that no one really knew about the music from the artist until I threw it out there and forced people to take notice. I think those are the ones that still, to the end of this day, will, if I sat there like on my deathbed, I'm like, oh, that Rude Guests and Skank and Lizard, that first Skunks tape. Yeah, those are the good days.
Uh-huh.
It's things like that, or, working with, Charlie Organer, who's, Studio One legend, who's just living here in the Chicagoland area, kind of, you know, undiscovered. Yet he had played with all the greats back in the day, and being able to, revive his career a little bit with, some of those recordings with the Prize Fighters, or having him play, a bunch of different festivals, and seeing someone's reaction that said Charlie Organer is still alive, and he's, oh my God, this is it's just one of those things. He's just sort of living here in our backyard. Let's put him to work. Let's get people to remember his legacy. Um, those are the things. Or like,
Mm,
your CD you have with, I made for Heather's book, just sort of the discovery of something you didn't know before,
Right.
I think it's always, you know, that's the most fulfilling thing, is to just sort of introduce someone to something new, you know.
mm,
Um, and it's not like a flex. It's not like, oh, you didn't know this and you should have known this. And the reason why I do these things is like, you didn't have a chance to know about this. There's only a handful of us who were this immersed, that we know about it. So I want some more people to understand it and learn about it, you
Mhm.
know.
mm.
Um, it's never been for bragging rights, and um, I'll continue to find old passion projects like that. I haven't done one in a while. Maybe you will inspire me to do something interesting. But like, a year or so ago, this English label called Soundwaves put out a rare Chicago reggae 45, one that, when the original copies are out there, they go for hundreds of dollars. And, things like that were like, oh my God, who's this guy in England who's, releasing Chi-Town reggae on 45, remastered and recut, and, you know, eh, I gotta talk to you, there's got to be things we have in common. How did this come about, and
Mm.
um, things like that, I think are
Okay.
exciting. Or, when I see a band like, like playing, I just got my Easy Star package today. When
Flying
I see a
Vipers?
band like, yeah, when I see a band like Flying Vipers, kind of get to the next level, and was able to use Jump Up as a bit of a springboard
Mhm.
to sustain them and get some notoriety, um, and then put out a record on. See, I look at things like that as a success. Loving Paupers or Flying Vipers or Expanders, all putting out their next records on Easy Star. I mean, that's bragging for me, right?
Mm,
Because I said like, oh, I was there at the beginning, and I was able to work with these bands and help them get to a level where a bigger label like Easy Star can try to get them to the next level.
Right.
yeah.
That I think is a win. I'm one guy, so there's a limit to what I can do, you know, and if a band has aspirations and much bigger aspirations, I will do anything I can to help you get to where you need to be. And if that means working with another label for your next release, or me just sort of keeping the catalog going. As your new record takes off, I'll be there.
Mhm.
This is like I said, this is a long game for me. I never play the short game. It's not about, that's what upsets me about some, record labels are like, oh yeah, we made 100 copies, sold out in 2 days, and we're never making it again. Like
I've seen
what
those.
what good is that? What good did that do at all?
Mhm.
The records are an opportunity for you to reach out and find new fans. You didn't make enough to find them. And if you made 100 records, you probably paid a lot to
Mhm.
make those. So you probably charged your biggest fans more money, right?
Mhm.
If you only made that many records, you had to charge like $30, $35 for that record. So your biggest fans are punished by your actions.
Yeah.
And you didn't have
Mhm.
the opportunity to find new fans. So there's all these kind of like hobby boutique labels that do this, and they just want to brag that something sold out like in 2, 3 days. And you're like, this is the wrong reason to put out records. Records should be something that, helps you find new fans and, is affordable, you know, and, you know,
Mhm.
Well, that's
a
a
lot
good
of people a
segue.
lot of people have lost that vision of what releasing music should be.
Well, that's a definitely good segue into talking about the jump up clubs that you have. You got the record club, the vinyl club, the CD club, and
I
the
got some tape, people.
tape. Yeah, the tape and 8 track, right? You got
Well, there's
vinyl,
no 8 track
CD.
club. I've only done 3 8 tracks.
Oh, that's right. Okay, so a lot of that stuff because I know I was in the vinyl club, but I don't think I could really do any more vinyl. I don't even have room for it. So now I this year I'm part of the CD club, and I love discovering some of the stuff that you put out. Like what was it that attractors that I wasn't
Oh
even
yeah,
aware at that
yeah,
was a fire record, man.
yeah.
That was a
That
great record.
Yeah, and that was like one of these. That's part of the reason why I have such poor answers to like, what am I excited about in the future? I'm like, I'm still excited about these records I just released in the past couple months. So,
Hmm.
and as I was getting that Attractors record over the finish line, art wise and some of the things with back and forth with Rich, timing wise, I was just excited to get that out,
Yeah.
and it's sad to some extent that at a time when I put out a record, I've already listened to it so many times, right?
Mhm.
I have to live vicariously through the people who are now receiving their copies and
Right.
posting about it and talking about it, and I need to keep my enthusiasm up on current things,
Hmm.
but still also be enthusiastic and work people over the finish line on future things. So it is definitely challenging because there is the possibility of being burnt out right as you release something
Right,
because
but
you've
I
been
mean it's
working
really
it.
good. It's good to discover things because I mean there's stuff that I would have never normally purchased myself, like that Susan Cottigan with magnetics. I wouldn't have
Yeah.
purchased that myself. I like the magnetics. I'm not really don't really know much about Susan Cottigan,
Mhm.
but the magnetics are great because you released
Yeah.
a couple other things. But I would have never purchased that before unless I was part of the club, which is
Yeah.
a good addition to
And
my collection.
and a lot of the club is planting seeds,
Hmm.
in my way. So, it was I can't remember when the last time you were in the vinyl club, but maybe we sent you the magnetics cocktails and
I
fairy
did.
tales, right?
Yeah.
So that was a year where, 2, 3 years ago, whatever it was, people already were hip to the magnetics.
Mhm.
So when they saw the announcement, that they're coming to Supernova, there's 100 or so people out there, right, who were in the club and who bought mail orders. They're like, I know who they are. That record's awesome. I
Right.
got that in the Jump Up, club. I wasn't, gonna probably randomly go out and buy a European import of a band that I didn't think I'd ever see. And then it just showed up in my house one day and I listened to it. This thing's pure fire. Now I'm excited to go to Supernova.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Totally.
like the last shipment that had the Baby Love the Van Dangos record,
Mhm.
I kind of see that enthusiasm. People get it, put it on, like, oh man, they're coming to Supernova. I got to really try to make it out. When am I going to get a chance to see this Danish band ever?
Exactly.
So if I can sneak things in those shipments, an interesting import or something, the discovery can lead to bands coming to town, bands coming to
Mhm.
the States, or at least when they come to the States, there's people, you know, in the front row who know your songs,
Right.
Mhm.
right? And there's nothing that jazzes a band more to come to a country and a market they've never been before, and there are people there singing your songs. You're like,
Yeah.
what the fuck? This is like the biggest high there is, right? And it's just these little things that planted the seeds over the years that can make that happen, you know? And I think it's really important. And it's also important to keep, the record club cheap, you
Mhm.
Now
know?
you just gotta now get your other Danish band out here because I would be there so fast.
Which
Napoleon
one?
Solo.
Oh,
Oh, I
yeah.
love Napoleon Solo.
I would love to see them someday too.
Yeah,
Uh
that Shot
yeah,
album is my favorite though
yeah.
that they
Oh, that
did.
was a
But
great
they
record.
and then
It
you
was kind of
released what was it? What was the it called again?
I did a rarities record, and then I also did their last record called, oh, I can picture it.
I can
Still
pick.
have a
Yeah,
couple
they're like
copies.
on a telephone board or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember it too.
Anyway, I do have a handful of those left, but yeah. And that was one of those things where Napoleon, I reached out to Napoleon Solo because, you know, they were one of my favorite bands in college.
Hmm.
And, you know, I think I probably wrote them a bunch of times back in the day when you had to write letters.
I
And
remember.
everyone kind of remembers each other. So I remember when I said I want to put out your record, and there was never any delay. They're like, you'd be the right person to do it. Thank you.
Yeah,
And they're still going. And I did that split Christmas record with Napoleon Solo and Leo in the lineup, and that did really well. Just sort of interesting. It was interesting to link two Danish bands from different eras
right.
who didn't really know each other. They knew of each other. And the fact that they were on a split Christmas record
Mhm.
put them in the same place to do the release album. And then, kind of magic happened.
Yeah.
You have almost the passing of the torch, right? It's like, you're a very good band. You continue on, pass the ska torch on, Leo, in the lineup. And now you still kind of see that going on because that new band, The Chains, has at least one or two guys from Leo in the lineup. So there's continuously passing on again,
Yeah.
um, the torch. Um, but yeah, then I did that Napoleon Solo rarities record, and that was pretty limited because it was kind of a super niche project, but people still look for that,
Oh, yeah.
and
Like,
early versions of their cassette tapes. And those were all like hand assembled, and I spray mounted all the jackets. Oh,
damn.
the things I did back then to, keep a pressing of like 200 or 300 affordable,
Hmm.
which included, spray mounting and stickers, and
Yeah.
it's a labor of love.
So I've heard that you're a part of an upcoming movie called a Steady Beat film.
Yeah,
Um,
that time I came out. That time I came out.
I've heard that this movie is a true chronicle of what actually happened in the LA ska scene back in the 90s, and I want to know what your thoughts are and your involvement in that.
Were you reading a PR release just now? That sounds very, very
Yeah, you're saying that because
very
you and I are
planned.
both in the movie.
Yes, absolutely. What was the question?
Oh, just but it was supposed to be funny, but it was just what are your thoughts on the whole LA ska scene and what's your involvement in the film as being part of the ska scene at that time, but just from another
Yeah,
era, from another area.
I think I truthfully joked about it in the interview. It was entirely based on jealousy.
Hmm.
I mean, what was going on out here at the time was super magical, and not to dissipate what we were doing in the Midwest as being less magical, but there was a lot of cool stuff happening in LA, and with specifically the traditional, in some ways, the LA scene became this traditional holdout while the rest of the country kind of went third wavy very fast, and you still kind of had this breeding ground that today, is still strong due to the roots laid down at that time. Like it's either something in the water or it's just like Napoleon's soul, the passing of the torch. The mob towns and the Allentons passed the torch to the Steady Fives and the
Mhm.
Elysians or whatever it is. I mean, there's
Yep.
just this lineage, and there's never been. It's a chain that never got broken,
Mhm.
right? There was always this continuation, and yeah, a lot of what was going on in LA, made me very jealous, and maybe probably had me work a little harder.
So jealous that you had
You
to
know,
release a couple C Spot albums.
there you go. Right, exactly. Well, I mean, it's a tough thing because, you know, um, as any scene is, it can be territorial, and someone like me who can come in pretty heavy-handed and really excited about something may be seen as more of a carpetbagger than, you know, but if I'm into your band, I will, reach out to you. And if someone in your local world isn't providing you with the support you need, you know, go outside your area. I can
Mhm.
get records anywhere in the world, including back into your backyard. Um, but I think, you know, if you go in too hard, then people are kind of, standoffish, like, oh no, well, we're an LA band, we need an LA studio, or we need an LA label to work with us. And they're like,
Mhm.
okay, well, if it doesn't work out, the offer still stands. And sometimes, people take you up on it. And sometimes people have extra projects. I mean,
Mhm.
I moved a lot of Roger Rivas records over the years, and Roger knows I bust my ass,
Yeah.
for his brand, you know, that I enhance his brand. I'm not a threat to his brand, you know.
Mhm.
But there's a lot of stuff going on in LA, and there's always going to be new recordings, and we'll see.
Yeah, we had Mobtown on a couple weeks ago, and we asked them about the change from their first album with Steady Beat to Moon Records,
Mhm.
and I think Wally was telling us about them having expectations of being on one of these bigger labels, national, international, like Moon, to actually promote them and do stuff.
Yeah,
But it was completely the opposite. So it doesn't mean just trying to get on a bigger label. Not saying that labels don't do that for you, but if they don't support you, you get lost kind of in the shuffle, unfortunately, unless you're on a label such as Jump Up or Steady Beat or someone who will back the bands and have basically have your back.
yeah.
Be there for you if they need you, things like that.
Well, I mean, it's a complicated world.
Mhm.
Uh, I'd have to look at what year that Mobtown second record came out, and if it was in that spot where they were cranking out two records every other week. I mean, people are going to get lost in the shuffle. And I think what people also don't realize is there needs to be some separation from the people who run the labels. What's the best way of putting it? Moon was a label started and run by someone who was in the marquee band on the label, the Toasters.
Mhm.
By definition, the label's ultimate goal is to get the Toasters to be a bigger band, a bigger national band, a bigger brand. That is the ultimate goal of the label. Everything else will fall second, and it's not because you don't want to, you know, support these other bands, but by definition, you started this label to push your stuff. And all the rest is kind of, the support system, right? You can't put as much time into everything. I guess what I'm saying is it's very difficult. It's a very difficult position for a record label to treat other bands properly if it was started by a, a band, like a person in a specific band,
Right.
right?
Because their best interest is in their
The
own band.
best interest will always be to get that person who started that record label. And this has happened over the years all the time. I mean, whether it's, Lookout falling apart because they, borrow from Green Day money to put out the Pattern record, I mean, there's just plenty of examples of things that were well intended at the time and you thought you could fix the short-term cash problems by having your record sell well, and then it didn't, and then everything falls apart. And
Right.
that happens all the time. You know,
Yeah.
it's tough. And you'll probably more often see record labels started by bands and artists than not. I mean, in some ways, Jump Up is a bit of an anomaly that or Stiff Dog. I mean, we're fans, right? That want to provide extra support for the bands, and we're not really picking favorites. It's like they're my children. If someone said, "Oh, who's your favorite kid?" You're like, "That's a shitty question." You don't ask that. They all have strengths, they all have weaknesses. You need to help, all of them on a given day in a different way. And someone who isn't in one of the bands can be more fair across the entire roster than someone who is in one of the bands. It's just the truth. It's the definition. And if you're in a band and you're running a record label, you will always run the risk of someone accusing you of not supporting them in favor of yours.
Right.
Whether it's true or not, it comes up all the time. You're always going to be vulnerable for that.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
No one ever does that when someone like me is literally, spreading myself thin, trying to make sure that everyone is taken care of, in the best way possible.
Right.
My interest is in the roster as a whole and the label as a whole, and I'm not, sitting here picking winners and losers.
Yeah.
Now, any parting words that you have for us? I'm sorry, not just for us, but our viewers as well. Anything that you want to tell the masses? Now's your time. No pressure.
The masses. Well, I don't know. I think what I want to tell people is to, get out of their comfort zone. Don't just let nostalgia take over. Don't just listen to the same things you listened to in high school, right? We can all feel nostalgic about the past but I mean, for you to just stop entirely searching out new music, searching out new bands, I think that's the overall message, right? People are doing this, pouring our hearts and energy, into putting out records because we want you to discover new bands.
Right.
I'll do crazy sales online just to get you to try new bands. If there's any message that I have, it should be don't make it so hard on us to get you to try new music. Like really, we're not here, trying to I mean, we're just trying to get you to listen to something new, and as more and more stuff appears on Spotify, and their algorithm is based upon, what they want you to hear, right? And soon it's going to be all AI anyway, so it's going to be all garbage. You need to find the new music that are actually played by musicians, and give them a chance, and say you're going to, see one of your favorite bands, your nostalgic band, whether it's, a Less Than Jake or something. Well, you know what? Show up early and see Bite Me Bambi. Get there early and see the Operators. Like, for Christ's sake, don't just like swing in 15 minutes before the headliner that you've seen 100 times.
Hmm.
I mean, that's just straight up shitty.
Right.
You know, there's people who are there who are trying to reach out to you, and if you're really a ska fan, get there early and see all the other bands.
Yeah.
I mean, live a little, you know, see something new. I mean, there's just so much nostalgia now. There's so many people just cranking out different versions of the same records. And every time I see that nonsense, I'm like, oh, it's just a cash grab, push some new bands, just please just take the time to get to the show early, see some new bands and try some new music.
Right.
I mean, I think it was in my weird, strangely ransom type manifesto that I put in everyone's subscription box that we need to fight against the nostalgia, over nostalgia. It's true.
Right.
Sure, that letter looks a little crazy because I wrote it stream of consciousness with many different font sizes, and people who know me would not be surprised about that. But everything in that letter was true. I am, fighting against, this overwhelming, nostalgia wave, and if you want ska music to continue in the future, you need to just support who's going to be there in 5-10 years.
Mm-hmm.
The classics aren't going to be around forever.
Right.
I'm not going to be around forever.
Well, those are some good parting words. Chuck, appreciate the time you took to speak with us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so
You
much.
know, I do very few podcasts, so I
Thank you.
choose wisely.
I appreciate that. Thank
Your
you.
questions were engaging.
We
tip
try.
my virtual hat to you.
We try.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hold on. Stay on real quick. We'll have a quick word right after. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Hello, Skankers. Jose here, aka Skanking Force. Would you like to win a free ska box? It's as easy as following Ska Box Rocks and Stiff Dog Records on Instagram and Facebook. And subscribe to Ska History Hour on YouTube and comment Ska Box Rocks in any video to enter. Good luck!